Imagine being denied entry to your own private jet, not because of a mistake or a security issue, but because someone decides you don't belong. Jasmine Reed, a young and powerful CEO, faces exactly that moment of crushing humiliation at one of the busiest airports in the country. How does it feel when your identity, your status, and your dignity are questioned in the most public way possible? What do you do when the very people tasked with service turn into gatekeepers of bias? And most importantly, how far would you go to reclaim what is rightfully yours? Not just for yourself, but for every person who has ever been pushed aside. This is more than a story of boarding a plane. It's a powerful journey of resilience, quiet strength, and a fight against systemic discrimination woven into the fabric of everyday life. Jasmine's calm determination forces us to ask, what does justice look like when it starts with standing your ground? How do small acts of courage become movements that change entire industries? If you want to hear a story that will move you, inspire you, and make you rethink the meaning of respect, hit like, share, and subscribe. Let's dive into Jasmine's story. The quiet tap of heels echoed steadily down the jet bridge as Jasmine Reed approached the entrance to her private jet parked at Midway International Airport. The early morning light filtered softly through the windows, casting a warm glow over the sleek aircraft. Her navy blue blazer caught the light just enough to gleam with subtle authority. Beneath it, a simple ivory blouse and tailored trousers spoke of professionalism and confidence rather than flash or flamboyance. Jasmine was calm-poised and deeply grounded in herself. Beside her, her younger sister Aaliyah matched her step for step. Both women shared the same determined expression that told anyone watching this was no ordinary boarding. For Jasmine, this trip was critical, a series of meetings and investor calls that could define the future of her growing tech startup. She was more than just a passenger. She was a visionary leader about to take flight. But before Jasmine could take the final step toward the cabin door, a firm voice sliced through the soft murmur of the boarding area. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you cannot board this way." Jasmine paused and looked up to see Rachel Mills standing firmly in front of the jet's doorway. Rachel was a flight attendant with a posture so rigid, an expression so cold it could have frozen fire. Her gaze was sharp, unyielding. Around them, a few airport staff and curious onlookers turned their heads. Whispered conversations bubbled quietly. Jasmine's boarding pass and identification were clutched loosely in her hand, but they suddenly felt useless. Rachel's refusal was as clear as day. No exceptions. The room tightened with tension, but Jasmine held steady. She met Rachel's eyes evenly without anger or frustration. "I am authorized to board this flight," she said quietly, producing the official boarding documents once more. "This is my aircraft." Rachel's eyes flicked briefly over the papers, then back to Jasmine's uniform, the crisp navy of a company executive. But she didn't soften. "This area is restricted," she said bluntly. "You do not have clearance?" Aaliyah stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with disbelief. "We have confirmed reservations and all necessary clearance. This is her flight." Rachel's expression hardened. "Young lady, if you insist on causing a disruption, security will be called." The quiet authority in Rachel's words was unmistakable, a threat wrapped in procedural language. The small crowd watching shifted uneasily. Some nodded knowingly, others whispered. Jasmine's cheeks burned, but not from shame. The fire was one of quiet resolve simmering beneath her composed exterior. Her mind raced, calculating every angle. She knew this moment was about more than boarding a plane. It was about respect, dignity, and the silent fight against invisible walls. She reached slowly for her phone. One call could change everything, but she would not sound desperate. Not now. Across the terminal, Lena Patel, A young FAA field officer on a layover observed the standoff with keen interest. Something about the scene resonated deeply with her, the way power was wielded in small moments, and how justice often hung in the balance of quiet decisions. She discreetly raised her phone and began recording. Back at the jet. Rachel's cold stare flickered as Jasmine's calm presence held firm. The tension was a palpable thing, stretching tight like a wire ready to snap. Without another word, Jasmine turned to Aaliyah. "Let's regroup," she said softly, and they stepped away from the crowd toward a quieter corner of the terminal. Aaliyah exhaled sharply. "That was completely uncalled for. We could have just called Dad." Jasmine shook her head gently. "Dad told us to handle this quietly, unless it's an emergency. For now, this is information, and the more they give themselves rope, the tighter the noose will become." Her eyes flicked back toward the jet. Rachel's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "VIP clearance denied." The words tasted bitter, but Jasmine let a small, measured smile touch her lips. She was already 3 steps ahead. 20 minutes later, Jasmine returned to the jet this time, not through the restricted staff entrance, but walking openly down the concourse. Her blazer caught the overhead lights, the gold crest of her company emblem polished to a subtle shine. Her compact leather portfolio tucked under her arm was unassuming, but purposeful, the tool of someone prepared and professional. Rachel Mills looked up from her post behind the counter, her smile thin and tight as Jasmine approached. Back again, Miss Reed. Jasmine's voice was even calm and firm. "I have boarding documents for Flight Reed 1. Boarding in 40 minutes. Rachel took the papers with deliberate care, flipping through them theatrically as if examining a suspect passport. "These need verification," she said loud enough for nearby travelers to hear. "Protocols take time." Nearby, a pair of businessmen exchanged amused glances. Jasmine noticed, but said nothing. A middle-aged man approached from the lounge entrance, his sharp eyes lighting up as he recognized Jasmine immediately. "Ah, there you are," he said warmly. "I was expecting you. You have exactly the look I asked to arrange. Professional, capable, discreet." Jasmine blinked slightly. Polite but neutral. "Thank you, sir, but I am traveling as a passenger today." The man's face flushed lightly. "My mistake entirely. No harm done." The moment passed, but the implication lingered. Jasmine had been mistaken for staff reinforcing Rachel's earlier narrative. Rachel slid the documents back with slow care. "Everything seems in order," she said, with the air of granting a favor. Jasmine nodded calmly. "Thank you for your thoroughness." They stepped past the counter into the lounge proper. Plush leather chairs, charging stations, and low murmur of conversation formed a bubble apart from the busy terminal. Rachel watched them go, triumphant in her belief she had publicly undermined Jasmine twice now. But Jasmine was not interested in this scoreboard. She was interested in the one Rachel did not even know existed. Maya's younger sister smiled knowingly. "You handled that like a pro." "Why give her the satisfaction?" Jasmine replied quietly. "When she thinks she has won, she becomes careless. People reveal themselves when they think they're safe." They settled into the far corner, the atmosphere thick with silent battle. Rachel's voice crackled sharply through a radio. "Security to Lounge 1. Whispers rose again as 2 uniformed officers entered. Rachel's tone syrupy sweet but full of steel. "These guests are not authorized. Please escort them out." The room held its breath. Jasmine didn't look at Rachel or the officers. She pulled her phone and spoke quietly into the receiver. "Falcon Control. Activate Protocol Falcon Blue. Location Midway. Jet Lounge 1. The words carried power beyond her years, clipped precise instructions to those who understood their meaning. Rachel laughed dismissively, but the smirk faltered briefly. "What is Protocol Falcon Blue?" she asked, mocking. Jasmine ended the call without answer, slipping the phone away. "We'll wait outside," she told Aaliyah. Rachel's fake sweetness returned. "Enjoy the public terminal." Jasmine's gaze was steady as they passed. Outside, the hum of the main terminal felt louder. Aaliyah whispered incredulously, "What was that? You didn't even say Dad's name." Jasmine smiled faintly. "It's not about him. Not yet. Just a note in the right file." The game had begun. Jasmine Reed and her sister Aaliyah moved away from the tense scene near the jet, seeking refuge in a quiet alcove in the terminal. The hum of distant announcements and rolling suitcases felt miles away from the charged atmosphere they had just left. Yet the weight of the confrontation lingered like a heavy fog. Jasmine's mind raced through every detail. She recalled Rachel Mills' dismissive tone, the way she blocked the cabin door as if Jasmine's very presence threatened her authority. It was more than a denial of boarding. It was an attempt to erase her. Aaliyah crossed her arms, her jaw tight with frustration. "This is ridiculous," she said softly, but with barely contained anger. "How can they do this? It's her jet, her flight. How can some flight attendant stop her from getting on?" Jasmine breathed deeply, steadying herself. It was a familiar dance, the one they had both seen before, the kind of unspoken barriers that were often invisible until you ran headlong into them. She felt the sting of those invisible walls but refused to be rattled. Not here, not now. "I know," Jasmine replied quietly, "but losing our temper won't help. Dad told us to stay calm, to gather facts, to document everything. If we react emotionally, they win the narrative." Aaliyah frowned, glancing back toward the jet where Rachel Mills still stood by the entrance, her posture radiating control and defiance. "It's just so humiliating. I wanted to board like any other passenger, but instead I feel like an intruder." Jasmine nodded slowly. She understood the ache of that feeling, being reduced to someone who has to prove her right to exist in spaces she already owned. It was exhausting and unfair. But she also knew something else. This moment was a test not just of patience, but of strength, of resolve. "We have to be smarter than this," Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm. "Every word, every gesture, every second we spend here is building a record." They gave themselves rope and were going to tie the noose with it. Aaliyah looked skeptical, but trusted her sister's judgment. She took out her phone and started typing notes while Jasmine pulled her own out and reviewed their boarding documents once again. Every detail was in order. The flight manifest confirmed Jasmine Reed as passenger number 1 on this private flight. The jet was registered under their family's company, and she held executive clearance. And yet, Rachel Mills had refused her entry, had questioned her legitimacy, had publicly humiliated her. Jasmine closed her eyes for a brief moment. The fight ahead wasn't just about a boarding dispute. It was about challenging the invisible biases entrenched deep in systems that were supposed to protect, but often discriminated. It was about rewriting the rules. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from Damian Carter, her legal counsel. "Protocol Falcon Blue is acknowledged. Stay calm. Support is en route." Jasmine's lips curved into a faint smile. The quiet strength of preparation was one of her greatest weapons. She didn't need to yell or confront with anger. She would let facts and law do the speaking. Aaliyah looked up, eyes filled with fierce loyalty. "You really think this will change anything?" Jasmine met her gaze steadily. Change is never easy or quick. But this moment, this choice to stand firm, is the first step. Sometimes just refusing to be erased is a revolution. The sisters sat side by side, a silent alliance amidst the white noise of the airport. Jasmine felt the familiar swirl of emotions inside anger, frustration, but also hope and determination. Her mind wandered to all the times she had faced bias in boardrooms, conferences, even family gatherings. Each instance a thread woven into the fabric of this struggle. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle ping from her phone. A video clip uploaded by an anonymous traveler appeared on her screen. It showed Rachel Mills blocking her path, speaking coldly to her in front of a crowd. The footage was raw and filtered. The comments beneath were already growing, some expressing shock, others disbelief. Jasmine knew this footage would be a double-edged sword. It could expose the truth or be twisted by those eager to defend the status quo. She sighed quietly. Truth was a powerful weapon, but also a fragile one. Nearby, a terminal speaker crackled with announcements, but Jasmine barely heard them. She was deep in thought, reflecting on the irony. She owned the plane, yet was made to feel like a trespasser. She held executive authority, but was powerless before an attitude steeped in discrimination. The contradictions were sharp and bitter. She glanced at Aaliyah, who was busy scrolling through social media feeds and news alerts. The story was spreading quietly, but surely. Online aviation forums buzzing with speculation. Passengers in the terminal whispering about the delay. Jasmine's heart tightened. The weight of public scrutiny was beginning to settle on her shoulders. She was no stranger to pressure, but this was different. This was personal. This was systemic. Yet beneath the pressure, there was an ember of resolve. She reminded herself that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. The choice to demand respect not just for herself, but for every person who had been pushed aside or silenced. Aaliyah looked up suddenly. Well, what if they call security? What if it gets worse? Jasmine's expression remained serene, but inside a quiet battle raged. Fear of escalation was real, but she refused to let it control her. "We control the narrative," she said softly. "Not by fighting with fists or harsh words, but by showing strength through calm and clarity. They want a reaction. We give them something else." The sisters sat quietly, their presence a quiet protest against injustice. Around them the airport moved on, unaware or unwilling to see the deeper currents at play. Jasmine's thoughts drifted to her father, a man who had taught her to navigate the world with grace, but never to accept less than she deserved. She thought of all the young women like her who looked up to her, and what this moment would mean if she faltered. "No," she told herself firmly. This was bigger than boarding a jet. This was about rewriting history, about claiming spaces denied for too long. She reached for her leather folio and pulled out a small notebook. With deliberate pen strokes, she began to write every detail, every exchange, every second of the encounter. The words flowed steady and precise, as though each letter was a stitch weaving the fabric of justice. Time moved slowly but purposefully. Each minute passed was another thread in the story she was determined to tell. Jasmine closed the notebook finally, her expression calm, but her eyes shining with fierce determination. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. The quiet tension surrounding Jasmine Reed's attempt to board her own jet was far from over. Behind the scenes, a complex chess game was unfolding, a battle of influence, protocol, and power. As Jasmine and Aaliyah maintained their composed stance in the terminal alcove, other players moved swiftly to shape the outcome. Ethan Brooks, the regional operations manager for Reed Aviation, was not accustomed to being ignored or delayed. He arrived at Midway with the expectation of a smooth day and efficient operations. Instead, he found himself stalled at the security checkpoint, caught between strict rules and the escalating dispute upstairs. "I'm here on company business," Ethan stated firmly, flashing his badge embossed with the airline's insignia. "I have clearance from corporate headquarters." The TSA officer barely glanced at his credentials. "I need to confirm with my supervisor," he said without warmth. Behind him, other officers milled about, eyes flickering occasionally toward the private jet. Ethan clenched his jaw and pulled out his phone. A quick call to corporate security and legal confirmed the brewing storm. Orders came back with precision, minimal disruption. No overt displays of authority unless absolutely necessary. The optics were delicate. Upstairs in the jet lounge, Rachel Mills paced with confident strides. The flight attendant who had blocked Jasmine's path was certain she held the upper hand. Her authority was backed by the operations team, and she wielded it with icy efficiency. She approached Jasmine and Aaliyah once again, her smile a practiced mask of politeness. "Still here," she said, voice sugary, sweet, but edged with steel. "I would have thought you found a more appropriate place by now." Jasmine met her gaze evenly. "We are quite comfortable," she replied calmly. There was no tremor in her voice, no hint of anger, only quiet resolve. Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly, lowering her voice just enough for nearby travelers to overhear. "It's remarkable how persistence can make some people believe they can bend the rules. But rules are rules." Aaliyah shifted in her seat, her patience visibly fraying. "Rules or excuses," she whispered. Rachel ignored the challenge and fixed her attention back on Jasmine. "You seem calm for someone just denied access. Perhaps you know something I don't." Jasmine's silence was infuriating. She closed her leather folio gently, folding her hands in front of her, a subtle display of control. The quiet strength unsettled Rachel more than any outburst would have. Across the terminal, a familiar figure observed the scene. Lena Patel had begun to live-stream the unfolding events discreetly from her coffee kiosk vantage point. She had seen similar confrontations before, but this one carried an undercurrent of something deeper. Her phone buzzed with messages as FAA colleagues shared and commented. The incident was quickly gaining traction within the tightly knit aviation oversight community, though the general public was still unaware. Back in the lounge, two businessmen approached Rachel, ostensibly to check boarding details. Their smiles were polite, but carried a hint of condescension. "Keeping the wrong people out today," one said with a grin. Rachel's smile didn't waver. "Just doing my job. Standards must be maintained." Jasmine caught the exchange from the corner of her eye, a small spark igniting behind her calm expression. Every unnecessary comment was another thread woven into the noose Rachel was unwittingly tightening around herself. Downstairs, Ethan finally made his way through the security gate. His expression tight with frustration, but carefully neutral. His phone vibrated with a message from Jonathan Reed, Jasmine and Aaliyah's father and company founder. "Hold position. Do not engage until prompted." Orders like that left little room for improvisation. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging the gravity of the moment and the importance of timing. He spotted Jasmine and Aaliyah immediately. Rachel was nearby, her posture still perfect, but with a subtle edge of impatience. Ethan's jaw clenched. This was worse than he expected. He stepped forward, his voice carrying just enough to cut through the ambient noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the sake of transparency, I think it's time to clarify a few things about Ms. Jasmine Reed's presence here." Heads turned instantly. Rachel's smile froze ever so slightly. Ethan pulled out a leather folder from his briefcase. "Per directive, I am authorized to present documentation confirming that Ms. Reed is not just a passenger, but the majority stakeholder of Reed Aviation and registered owner of the aircraft currently parked at Tarmac Bay 3. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, and then whispers spread. She owns the plane. What is happening? Several passengers pulled out their phones, eager to capture the moment. Lena's live stream zoomed in as Ethan placed the documents visibly on a nearby table. Thomas Blake, the airline's director of operations, entered just then. Tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding executive authority. Blake scanned the room and smiled broadly at Rachel. "Supervisor Mills," he said warmly, "I hear you've been managing quite the situation." Rachel's glance toward Jasmine was deliberate. "Just doing my job to maintain standards." Blake surveyed the lounge and then nodded approvingly. "Good. We can't have disruptions in our premium facilities. Optics matter." Aaliyah's stomach sank. She leaned close to Jasmine, whispering, "He's taking her side." Jasmine's eyes remained steady, her mind cataloging every word. Even that depends on what they think winning looks like. Blake's voice rose just enough to be heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this brief procedural matter. Reed Aviation remains committed to ensuring all guests receive the highest standard of service." The crowd nodded, some satisfied, others skeptical. Rachel stepped back, her smile serene. The game was over from her perspective. But Jasmine's pen continued to move across her legal pad. Minutes later, Ethan's phone buzzed again, and he received clearance to proceed. "Hold your position," Blake whispered as Ethan nodded subtly. To the casual observer, Jasmine was boxed in. Rachel had executive backing, Ethan was neutralized, and the public narrative tilted in their opponent's favor. But to those who knew the Reed family's way, this was only another move in a longer strategic game. Jasmine sat exactly where she had been, her notes open, Aaliyah beside her. Daniel's delayed arrival at security and Blake's public alignment with Rachel Mills were all carefully documented. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table as she closed her folio and glanced up at the expectant crowd. The tension was deceptive calm, but the storm was far from over. The hum of the airport terminal was punctuated by murmurs and the occasional rustle of rolling luggage as travelers passed unaware or only partially aware of the quiet storm brewing near the Reed private jet. Jasmine Reed and her sister Aaliyah sat calmly in the general seating area a few steps away from the luxurious lounge from which they had been ejected. The opulent leather chairs and polished floors felt miles away from the sharp edge of injustice they had just encountered. Nearby, a handful of passengers had paused their conversations, some exchanging curious glances, others discreetly pulling out their phones. Among them was Lena Patel, the FAA officer who continued to film the encounter with a steady hand. She had no official duty at the moment, but the weight of what she was witnessing compelled her to capture the truth. Her stream quietly circulated among aviation colleagues, sparking conversation and concern. Aaliyah shifted uncomfortably beside her sister. "This isn't right," she whispered. "They can't just push her out like this. The audacity." Jasmine nodded quietly, her gaze steady. "This isn't just about one flight or one gate. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong. And we're here to make sure that stops." She took a sip of water, her eyes drifting toward the lounge entrance where Rachel Mills still lingered. The flight attendant's posture was unyielding, but Jasmine noticed the subtle glances Rachel threw toward the staff around her. She was building a narrative, one carefully crafted interaction at a time. Every word, every gesture was a thread in a web intended to entangle Jasmine and maintain the illusion of protocol. Jasmine's mind drifted to the countless stories she had heard from others, friends, colleagues, and strangers who had faced similar dismissals, masked as rules. The subtle exclusion, the whispered doubts, the outright refusals. She felt the weight of those collective experiences settle deep inside her. Yet despite the anger and frustration that simmered beneath her calm surface, Jasmine remained resolute. She was not here to fight with words or fists, but with precision, patience, and proof. Every detail recorded, every interaction noted, every slight documented. Aaliyah bit her lip, glancing around nervously. What if this escalates? What if they call security and things get ugly? Jasmine placed a reassuring hand on her sister's arm. We don't control their actions, but we control our response. They want to fight. We give them a stand. Across the terminal, a murmuring crowd was growing. Passengers whispered about the delay, the unusual tension, the boldness of two women quietly defying an entire system. Smartphones emerged, cameras tilted, and the story began to spread. Jasmine's phone buzzed softly. A message from Damian Carter, her legal counsel. Stay calm. Support arriving shortly. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. The strategy was unfolding. The allies were moving, but the fight was far from over. Suddenly, Rachel Mills returned to the seating area. Her smile was tight, but her voice was sweet as honey dipped in vinegar. I see you're still here, she said deliberately, loud enough for nearby ears. This isn't the place for guests without proper clearance. I suggest you find somewhere more suitable. Jasmine met her gaze evenly. We are quite comfortable, thank you. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Persistence is admirable, but it can also be disruptive. Aaliyah's patience snapped slightly. Disruptive. Maybe it's the refusal to recognize her rights that's disruptive. Rachel ignored the remark, turning her attention to the curious crowd. Rules exist for a reason. Without them, chaos ensues. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but inside she felt the familiar fire kindle. She knew rules were often selectively applied tools wielded to preserve power and exclusion. This was exactly the kind of moment her father had warned her about. The moment where calm dignity became resistance. From the corner, Lena Patel's live stream continued unabated. Comments flowed rapidly from fellow FAA officers and aviation insiders dissecting Rachel's tone, her repeated threats, her unwillingness to de-escalate. Aaliyah leaned closer to Jasmine. She's building a case, isn't she? Trying to trap you in a narrative? Jasmine nodded slowly. Every word, every move is being recorded. We'll use it when the time is right. The tension was palpable. Passengers around them had divided. Some whispered support for Jasmine, others cast doubtful glances at the unfolding drama. The divide was a microcosm of a much larger struggle, playing out across society. Jasmine's thoughts drifted to the weight of visibility. To be seen was a gift, but also a burden. Every action analyzed, every motive questioned. The public eye was both shield and spotlight. She glanced at Aaliyah, who was scrolling social media updates, her face a mixture of hope and anxiety. The story was gaining traction, but the backlash was inevitable. Jasmine's internal voice reminded her that the path to justice was rarely straightforward. It required endurance, courage, and the willingness to face the unknown. Minutes passed like hours. The terminal buzzed with the low hum of everyday life, but around Jasmine and Aaliyah, a different rhythm pulsed, one of quiet rebellion and unyielding hope. Then footsteps approached, deliberate, measured, but firm enough to command attention. The crowd shifted their gaze. It was Ethan Brooks, the regional operations manager, accompanied by Damian Carter, Jasmine's legal counsel. Ethan's presence was imposing, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who understood the stakes. He nodded briefly to Jasmine, signaling his support. Damian's calm voice cut through the murmur. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a matter of rights and respect. Ms. Reed's presence here is lawful and verified. The words rippled through the crowd. Phones snapped photos and videos capturing every moment. Rachel Mills' smile tightened, but she held her ground. The game had shifted, but the fight was far from over. Jasmine sat back, her heart steady, her mind clear. The public watch had begun, and with it, the first glimmers of change. The atmosphere inside the airport lounge was thick with anticipation as the doors swung open to admit a man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. Ethan Brooks stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room with a practiced gaze that took in every detail, every nuance. He was the regional operations manager for Reed Aviation, a man accustomed to navigating the complex interplay of corporate policy and frontline reality. Ethan's arrival was no accident. It was a calculated move designed to reinforce the airline's commitment to protocol while maintaining the illusion of control. His face was calm, but his mind was alert. He knew the stakes were high, and the eyes of many were upon this small enclosed space. Rachel Mills stood to greet him, her smile polite but strained. "Director Brooks," she said, "I've been managing the situation as best I can. We have guests attempting to access areas for which they lack clearance." Ethan's eyes flicked briefly to Jasmine, who remained seated, poised, and composed as always. "I see," he said evenly. "And these guests would be—" Rachel stepped closer, confident. "Ms. Jasmine Reed and her sister. They have been asked to wait in the public terminal." Ethan nodded slowly, as if weighing the situation. His voice lowered just enough to be heard by those nearby. "Ms. Reed is a significant shareholder and registered owner of the aircraft." The words hung in the air. For a moment no one spoke, but the weight of the revelation rippled through the lounge. Jasmine met Ethan's gaze, a faint smile touching her lips. This was the moment she had prepared for, the moment when facts would override prejudice. Thomas Blake, the airline's director of operations, entered behind Ethan, his presence more commanding still. He surveyed the scene with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Blake was a man who valued appearances and control, and he understood the optics of this moment better than most. He approached Rachel, shaking her hand firmly. "Supervisor Mills, I hear you've been handling quite the challenge." Rachel smiled broadly, but the tension beneath was unmistakable. "Just maintaining standards, sir." Blake turned to the assembled guests, his voice carrying with practiced assurance. "We cannot have disruptions in our premium facilities. Optics are crucial to our brand and service." Aaliyah leaned close to Jasmine, whispering, "He's on her side." Jasmine nodded silently. Support could be fickle, but the game was far from over. Ethan moved closer. "I was delayed at security," he said plainly. "Protocol required thorough verification." Rachel nodded as if this explained everything, but Jasmine was not convinced. The words felt like a shield for deeper resistance. She felt the invisible barriers press in yet again. The crowd was restless now, some nodding in agreement, others skeptical. Phones were out, cameras ready. The moment was turning into a spectacle, but Jasmine refused to be drawn into theatrics. Blake's voice rose again. "Thank you for your patience during this procedural matter. Reed Aviation remains committed to providing the highest standards for all guests." The statement was polished but hollow to Jasmine's ears. It sounded like closure, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. Minutes later, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan Reed. "Hold your position. Wait for my signal." Ethan's jaw tightened. The careful orchestration behind the scenes was clear. Every move measured, every word weighed. The family's influence extended far, but the opposition was formidable. Jasmine sat with her legal pad open, jotting notes, every interaction, every statement carefully recorded. Her mind remained sharp as the stakes escalated. Each moment was a thread woven into the fabric of justice she intended to unravel. From the corner, Lena Patel's livestream captured every word, every gesture. The FAA officer's camera became a silent witness to unfolding history. Jasmine's gaze met Lena's, briefly a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was no ordinary dispute. It was a turning point. Rachel returned to her post, but Jasmine could see the tightness around her eyes. The smug confidence was giving way to cautious calculation. Blake lingered near the exit, speaking quietly with an aide, but Jasmine knew the game was shifting. This was corporate politics at its most ruthless. The balance of power seemed fragile, but Jasmine's resolve never wavered. She was not here to play small. She was here to change the game. The tension in the lounge was palpable as Jasmine Reed's legal counsel, Damian Carter, finally arrived. His presence shifted the atmosphere immediately. Damian was calm, composed, and highly skilled in navigating conflicts where law and corporate interests collided. He carried a quiet authority that both reassured Jasmine and unsettled the airline staff. Jasmine watched as Damian approached the airline representatives with measured steps. His eyes met Rachel Mills' cold gaze without flinching. "Good afternoon," Damian began smoothly. "I'm here on behalf of Ms. Reed to resolve the ongoing dispute regarding her boarding rights." Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ms. Reed has been denied access based on protocol," she said. "Our priority is the safety and comfort of all passengers." Damian nodded politely, but his tone remained firm. "Ms. Reed's documentation is complete and verified. Her rights as a passenger and majority stakeholder cannot be lawfully obstructed. Any further denial would constitute discrimination and breach of contract." The words hung in the air, and a murmur rippled through the onlookers. The stakes had just escalated from procedural disagreement to potential legal liability. Jasmine felt a surge of hope, but tempered it with caution. The airline's response could still be unpredictable. Rachel glanced at Thomas Blake, who stood nearby, his expression unreadable. Blake stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Carter, we understand your position, but we must follow established procedures. Exceptions cannot be made lightly without jeopardizing operational integrity." Damian's gaze sharpened. "Ms. Reed is not requesting an exception. She is exercising her rightful access. The procedures must be applied fairly and without prejudice." The back and forth continued, with corporate representatives emphasizing policy, while Damian countered with legal precedent and passenger rights. The crowd listened intently, some whispering support, others watching with guarded interest. Jasmine sat with her arms crossed her face, composed but inside a fierce battle of patience and resolve. Her mind replayed every interaction, analyzing every word. This was a defining moment, the point at which justice could be claimed or denied. Outside the lounge, the story had begun to capture wider attention. Social media posts and live streams circulated rapidly, painting Jasmine as a figure of quiet strength standing up against injustice. Aviation forums buzzed with debate and speculation. Some defended the airline, citing protocol. Others decried what they saw as blatant discrimination. Aaliyah kept close by, whispering encouragement. "You're doing everything right. Stay strong." Jasmine nodded gratefully, but she was painfully aware of the emotional toll. This fight was not just about boarding a jet. It was about dismantling deep-seated biases and systemic exclusion. Suddenly, Damian's phone buzzed. He glanced down, reading the message with a brief tightening of his jaw. "There is a new development," he said. "FAA oversight is now officially monitoring the situation. They have deployed a field officer to observe and document." Jasmine's eyes met Lena Patel's across the room. The FAA officer gave a slight nod. Her presence was a silent but powerful statement, an indication that this was no longer a private dispute, but a matter of regulatory and public interest. Rachel Mills shifted uneasily, but her voice remained steady. "We will continue to cooperate with FAA officials to ensure compliance." Damian's expression remained unreadable. "Compliance includes respecting passengers' rights and preventing discrimination. The standoff stretched on the crowd thick with anticipation. Airline staff and legal teams exchanged terse words. Jasmine felt the weight of history on her shoulders, but also the strength of her conviction. Her thoughts drifted to the countless individuals who had faced similar barriers and how few had the resources or support to fight back. She was determined to be a catalyst for change, not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced. Hours seemed to pass, yet the resolve in the room never wavered. Cameras recorded every interaction, voices were measured, and every word carried the weight of consequences. Finally, Damien stepped toward Jasmine, his voice low but steady. "This matter will be formally reviewed. Ms. Reed's boarding rights are to be honored pending the outcome." Relief flickered across Jasmine's features, but she remained guarded. The battle had reached a critical juncture, but the war for justice was ongoing. Rachel Mills lingered briefly, her posture rigid, before turning on her heel and exiting with the grace of a soldier retreating strategically. The moment was far from victory, but the tide was beginning to turn. Jasmine closed her leather folio and looked toward Aaliyah. "We have made it this far. Now we watch and prepare for what comes next." Aaliyah smiled softly. "Together." The crowd began to disperse slowly, the airport returning to its usual rhythm, but the echoes of the confrontation lingered. Jasmine knew this was just the beginning of a much larger fight, but for now, the small victory was enough. The story of Jasmine Reed's denied boarding was no longer confined to the hushed corners of the airport lounge. Within hours, it exploded into the public consciousness, fueled by social media shares, live streams, and viral video clips. News outlets clamored to cover the unfolding drama, a young, powerful black CEO standing her ground against an airline's flight attendant and management. Jasmine watched the growing storm with a mix of apprehension and resolve. She was no stranger to public scrutiny, but this felt different. The stakes were higher. The narrative could shape not only her reputation, but the broader fight against systemic discrimination. Her phone buzzed constantly, with messages, calls, and notifications. Damien Carter's calm voice was a steady anchor in the whirlwind. He advised on Statement's legal strategy and how to navigate the media attention with grace and control. The hashtag #RajaReedRights began trending across platforms, a symbol of resistance and dignity. Supporters rallied online, calling out the airline's handling of the incident and demanding accountability. Critics attempted to twist the story, painting Jasmine as entitled or disruptive. Television news hosts debated the issue, splitting public opinion. Some framed it as a necessary enforcement of protocol. Others highlighted the racial undertones and power dynamics at play. The polarized coverage reflected a nation grappling with issues of race privilege and justice. Jasmine found herself preparing for interviews and public appearances, a role she had never sought but accepted with quiet determination. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture deliberate. She understood that her conduct would be scrutinized far beyond the immediate circle of supporters. Meanwhile, Rachel Mills launched her own media campaign. Sitting in a crisply tailored suit, she appeared on morning talk shows and news segments presenting her side of the story. Her tone was measured, but carried a hint of grievance and victimhood. She claimed she was simply enforcing rules, ensuring safety and comfort for all passengers. She suggested Jasmine's status as CEO and shareholder had influenced her actions unfairly. Her narrative was carefully crafted to sow doubt and sympathy. Social media buzzed with renewed energy as clips from both sides circulated alongside heated commentary. The public was polarized with hashtags "Flight Fairness" and "Rule Respect," competing against "Reed Rights" and "Justice for Jasmine." Jasmine's internal world was a whirlwind of emotions. She wrestled with frustration at the distortion of truth, exhaustion from constant vigilance, and a deep commitment to her cause. The spotlight was unforgiving, but it was also a platform for change. Aaliyah remained a steadfast presence by her side, offering candid moments of support and grounding honesty. "You're stronger than you know," she reminded her sister during late-night conversations. Jasmine smiled faintly, grateful for the sisterly bond that helped her carry the burden. She thought often about the young women watching the story unfold, hoping to see someone who looked like them, refusing to be sidelined. But beneath the resolve, there were moments of doubt. Was the fight worth it? Could one person really make a difference against entrenched systems? The questions lingered in quiet moments between public appearances. Damien's voice cut through those doubts. "Change starts with courage and persistence," he said. "Your story is inspiring, but it's also a call to action for many." The growing media storm forced airline executives to respond publicly. Reed Aviation released statements expressing regret for the incident and promising internal reviews and cooperation with regulatory authorities. Yet the statements felt hollow to many critics, a perfunctory attempt to contain damage rather than genuine accountability. Jasmine's supporters demanded concrete action, not empty words. As the coverage intensified, investigative journalists began digging deeper, uncovering troubling patterns. Former employees came forward anonymously alleging discriminatory practices and mishandling of complaints within the airline's premium services division. The revelations painted a picture of systemic bias supported by management indifference and sometimes complicity. Jasmine's fight was no longer isolated. It was part of a broader battle against institutional discrimination. Jasmine reflected on the burden and opportunity this new phase presented. The media storm was messy, unpredictable, and exhausting, but it amplified voices that had long been ignored. She embraced the role of reluctant advocate, understanding that her experience was a catalyst for conversation change and hopefully justice. The story was bigger than her personal struggle. It was about the future of equity in the skies. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Damien and Jasmine worked tirelessly, preparing legal documents, organizing advocacy, and building coalitions with civil rights groups and aviation watchdogs. Aaliyah coordinated social media efforts, ensuring their message remained clear, authentic, and impactful. Every detail mattered in shaping public perception and influencing decision-makers. Late one evening, Jasmine sat alone, reviewing a file of media clips and messages of support. The path ahead was uncertain, but the momentum was undeniable. She whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." The media storm around Jasmine Reed's confrontation with Reed Aviation staff had unleashed a wave of reactions unlike anything the airline had anticipated. While supporters rallied behind Jasmine and praised her courage, critics and defenders of the airline mounted a counteroffensive aimed at casting doubt and undermining her claims. Within the corporate walls of Reed Aviation, the mood was tense. Thomas Blake, the director of operations, moved quickly to contain the damage and protect the airline's reputation. He convened emergency meetings with public relations, legal, and security teams. His tone was clipped and businesslike. "We need to control the narrative," Blake said. "We cannot allow this to spiral. Our people must stay unified and consistent." Rachel Mills found herself at the center of the storm. Once confident and unyielding, she now felt the pressure mounting. Media requests, interviews, and social media backlash were relentless. She was advised to keep a low profile, but she resisted. She wanted her version of the story heard to defend her actions and preserve her career. Her media appearances continued with carefully scripted statements, highlighting the importance of protocol and safety. She portrayed herself as a professional, caught in a difficult situation trying to do her job. But cracks began to show in her carefully maintained facade. Anonymous leaks from former employees painted a different picture. Internal memos and complaint logs surfaced, revealing a history of allegations against Rachel, including discriminatory remarks and hostile treatment toward passengers and staff perceived as outsiders. Jasmine's legal team obtained a dossier of these documents, which they prepared to use in ongoing regulatory investigations. Damian Carter reviewed the material with a measured but grim expression. The evidence was damning and revealed systemic problems within the airline's culture. Outside corporate offices, activists, and advocacy groups organized rallies and online campaigns demanding accountability and reform. The hashtag #ReadJustice trended alongside Read Rights, spreading the call for change. Jasmine found herself both heartened and burdened by the attention. She understood the power of the moment, but also the risks of backlash. Friends warned her to be cautious, but she was resolute. The fight was bigger than reputation or career. It was about dismantling barriers that affected countless others. Aaliyah remained her steadfast supporter, offering candid words and emotional strength. Late one evening, after a particularly grueling day, she said softly, "You're not just fighting for yourself. You're carrying the hopes of so many." Jasmine's heart swelled with gratitude, but also a quiet ache. The weight of expectation was heavy. She often found herself wrestling with doubts and exhaustion, wondering if the fight would ever end. One night alone in her office, she stared at the growing pile of messages of support criticism and media reports. She thought of the countless others who had been silenced or pushed aside, and how rare it was for someone to stand up so publicly. She whispered to herself, "This is what change looks like." Meanwhile, Thomas Blake was playing a longer game. He was not about to let Jasmine's challenge topple the carefully built corporate machine. He began reaching out to industry insiders, media consultants, and lobbyists. The goal was to muddy the waters, create doubt, and delay regulatory action. Behind the scenes, attempts were made to discredit Jasmine by highlighting her youth, her ambition, and questioning her motives. The campaign was subtle, but effective enough to create divisions in public opinion and within regulatory circles. Jasmine and Damian were not caught off guard. They anticipated this multi-front assault and prepared responses carefully. Damian worked to build alliances with civil rights organizations and aviation watchdogs, ensuring the story remained in the spotlight and pressure continued. The public was watching closely. The polarized reactions reflected broader societal struggles over race, power, and justice. Jasmine's story had become a lightning rod for these debates, and the stakes felt higher than ever. Amid the chaos, Jasmine found moments of solace in simple routines. Aaliyah's laughter during late-night conversations, a quiet walk in the park, the support of close friends and family. These small anchors kept her grounded and reminded her of why she fought. One afternoon, Jasmine received a call from a former Reed Aviation employee who wished to remain anonymous. The voice on the other end shared harrowing stories of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation within the company. The call reinforced the depth of the issues Jasmine was confronting and steeled her resolve. Jasmine knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but the momentum was undeniable. The story that began with a denied boarding had grown into a movement demanding accountability, transparency, and respect. She took a deep breath and looked out her office window at the city skyline. The fight was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The turning point came quietly, but with a force that shattered every carefully constructed narrative against Jasmine Reed. It arrived in the form of a video, a full unedited live stream of the gate incident released by a courageous bystander who had recorded the entire confrontation from the beginning. The footage was raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. Viewers saw Rachel Mills' cold refusal, Jasmine's calm insistence, and the unfolding tension without any cuts or edits. It was a moment of truth laid bare, and it went viral almost overnight. Social media erupted with reactions as the video spread like wildfire. Supporters hailed Jasmine as a beacon of strength and dignity, while critics were silenced by the clarity of the evidence. The hashtag #socialjustice surged ahead of competing narratives, drowning out doubt and speculation. At Reed Aviation's headquarters, the video landed like a bombshell. Thomas Blake and his PR team scrambled to contain the fallout. The carefully scripted defense and disinformation campaign crumbled in the face of irrefutable proof. Meanwhile, Jasmine and Damien reviewed the video together. Damien's expression was grave but resolute. This was the evidence needed to shift the investigation from uncertain to decisive. The full footage exposed more than just the gate dispute. It revealed a pattern of behavior by Rachel Mills, dismissive, condescending, and at times openly hostile. The video also captured interactions with other staff members suggesting a culture of exclusion and bias within the premium services division. Days later, a coalition of former Reed Aviation employees, some still working in the industry, released a detailed dossier supporting the video evidence. It included internal complaint records corroborating stories of discriminatory conduct and systemic retaliation. The combined impact was undeniable. The narrative had flipped. What began as a personal fight had become an indictment of a broader system. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Media outlets retracted earlier criticisms and focused on the systemic issues revealed. Talk shows invited civil rights experts and aviation ethicists to discuss the implications. The conversation expanded beyond Jasmine's story to the urgent need for reform. Jasmine watched the shift with cautious optimism. The spotlight was brighter and harsher, but the tide had turned. Her fight was no longer isolated. It had sparked a movement. Aaliyah remained her anchor, offering unwavering support through the relentless scrutiny. "You did this," she reminded Jasmine one evening. "You made them see." But with victory came new challenges. The airline was under intense regulatory scrutiny, and corporate pressure was mounting behind the scenes. Thomas Blake was not finished playing his cards, and the fight was far from over. Jasmine reflected on the months of struggle and the countless moments of doubt. She thought of those who had faced injustice silently and those who now watched and hoped. The turning point was a testament to the power of truth and resilience. She prepared for the next phase of the battle, ensuring that justice would not only be acknowledged, but enforced, and that meaningful change would follow. The uncut video and employee dossier became central to regulatory hearings and internal investigations. Jasmine's role evolved from victim to advocate to a leader shaping the future of airline equity and accountability. In private moments, she allowed herself a brief smile, knowing that the turning point was not an end, but a beginning, a spark lighting the way for those who would come after. The momentum built steadily. The uncut video footage combined with the dossier from former employees had shifted the balance irreversibly. Reed Aviation was now under intense scrutiny from both regulatory bodies and the public. Jasmine Reed had become a symbol of resilience, but also a catalyst for change in an industry long resistant to it. Inside the FAA headquarters, Jasmine stood before a panel of investigators ready to share her account and the evidence she had gathered. The room was sterile and formal, but Jasmine's calm presence filled it with gravity. Every word she spoke was measured, precise, and full of quiet authority. Damien Carter sat beside her, offering support but also ready to intervene, with legal expertise when necessary. Together, they laid out the timeline, the evidence, and the patterns of discrimination that had come to light. Questions came fast, and detailed probing into procedures, policies, and the culture within Reed Aviation. Jasmine answered with clarity, drawing on her experience and the extensive documentation she had compiled. The investigators listened intently, recognizing that this was more than a single incident. It was a systemic failure, demanding accountability and reform. Meanwhile, public support surged. Advocacy groups held rallies and online forums exploded, with calls for airlines nationwide to adopt policies modeled on what became known as the Reed Protocol, a comprehensive framework addressing bias training, accountability, and whistleblower protections. Reed Aviation's leadership found itself in an untenable position. The board convened emergency meetings and began planning sweeping changes to salvage the company's reputation and comply with mounting regulations. Thomas Blake was removed from his position effective immediately amid the investigations. His tenure, marked by a culture that allowed bias and exclusion to flourish, was now a liability the company could no longer afford. Rachel Mills faced suspension pending the outcome of investigations and mounting legal challenges. The once confident flight attendant now confronted the consequences of her actions and the culture she represented. Jasmine felt a profound sense of vindication, but tempered it with humility. Justice was beginning, but the work was far from complete. The changes implemented had to be real, lasting, and far-reaching. She returned to her office, exhausted but determined. The fight had exposed painful truths, but also opened a door to transformation. Her role now was to lead with empathy and tenacity, ensuring the Reed Protocol would be more than words on paper. Aaliyah joined her one evening, bringing news of growing partnerships with advocacy organizations and government agencies. "People are paying attention," she said. "This is bigger than we imagined." Jasmine smiled with a mix of hope and responsibility. The moment was historic, the journey long, but the destination vital. She often reflected on the strength required to stand firm in the face of adversity and the importance of community and support. So alone the fight would have been overwhelming, but together a movement was born. The Reed Protocol was adopted as a model by other airlines, setting new industry standards. Quarterly audits, mandatory bias training, and transparent complaint tracking became the norm, not the exception. Jasmine spoke at conferences, panels, and workshops, sharing her story and advocating for equity and respect across all levels of aviation. Her voice was steady and inspiring, resonating with many who saw in her the embodiment of change. The airline industry began to transform slowly but surely. Passengers noticed the difference in the way they were treated, and employees felt safer and valued. The culture was shifting from exclusion to inclusion. Jasmine knew there would always be challenges and setbacks, but the foundation had been laid. The moment justice began was a testament to perseverance, courage, and the power of standing up when it mattered most. Months had passed since the incident at Midway Airport, yet the echoes of Jasmine Reed's confrontation with Reed Aviation continued to resonate across the industry. The Reed Protocol was no longer just an idea or a proposal. It had become a standard, a commitment embraced by airlines nationwide to ensure equity, respect, and accountability. Jasmine stood in a brightly lit conference room addressing a group of executives and aviation professionals gathered to discuss the ongoing implementation of the protocol. Her voice was steady and clear. Every sentence carried the weight of experience and the promise of progress. She spoke about the importance of recognizing bias not as isolated incidents, but as systemic issues requiring comprehensive solutions. She emphasized the need for transparency and complaint handling, regular training, and most importantly, creating safe channels for employees and passengers to speak out without fear of retaliation. Her message was met with nods, thoughtful questions, and a growing sense of urgency. The conversation was no longer theoretical, but practical, about real steps to change culture and behavior in an industry known for its traditions and resistance to change. Meanwhile, Reed Aviation had undergone a significant transformation. New leadership committed to diversity and inclusion had taken the helm. Policies had been rewritten, audits established, and a task force formed to monitor progress and address issues promptly. Rachel Mills was no longer part of the company. Her suspension had become a permanent termination following the conclusion of investigations. The story of her actions and the culture she embodied was used in training sessions as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what the industry must leave behind. Jasmine and Aaliyah remained close allies, their bond strengthened by shared experience and a common mission. They often reflected on how far they had come and the road still ahead. One evening after a long day, Jasmine sat quietly reviewing reports and feedback from the latest training sessions. The data showed measurable improvement in employee attitudes, passenger satisfaction, and complaint resolution. She allowed herself a small smile, but reminded herself that progress required vigilance. Complacency was the enemy of change. Her phone buzzed with a message from Damian Carter, her legal counsel. The FAA has formally adopted the Reed Protocol nationwide. This is a historic victory. Jasmine felt a swell of pride, but also a deep sense of responsibility. The victory was not hers alone, but belonged to everyone who had dared to stand up and demand better. She shared the news with Aaliyah, who celebrated quietly with her. "We did it," Aaliyah said simply. "Yes," Jasmine replied, "but this is just the beginning." The Reed Protocol continued to evolve as new challenges emerged. Jasmine remained an active voice in aviation ethics, working with policymakers, regulators, and advocacy groups to refine and expand the framework. Her leadership inspired a new generation of professionals committed to fairness and inclusion. She spoke at universities and conferences, encouraging young women and minorities to pursue careers in aviation and leadership. Despite the victories, Jasmine remained humble and grounded. She knew the journey toward true equity was ongoing. The fight she had ignited was not just about her story, but about creating lasting change for generations to come. As she boarded a flight 1 year after the incident, she noticed the subtle but meaningful differences. The warm greetings from flight attendants, the genuine smiles, the absence of whispered doubts. Her seat was ready, her boarding pass accepted without question. The hum of the engines was familiar, but the atmosphere was transformed, a quiet testament to resilience and progress. Looking out the window, Jasmine reflected on the journey from confrontation to change. The path had been long and fraught with challenges, but the destination was clear. Justice had begun, and it was here to stay. The day had come full circle for Jasmine Reed as she stood at the entrance to the private jet lounge at Midway Airport. It had been nearly a year since that fateful moment when she was denied entry to her own aircraft. Today, there was no confrontation, no hesitation. Instead, there was calm respect and quiet acknowledgement of a hard-won victory. Jasmine's stride was confident but measured. She wore a tailored navy blazer and crisp white blouse, her appearance professional yet approachable. Beside her walked Aaliyah, her sister and closest ally, whose smile carried the warmth of shared triumph and unbreakable bond. As they approached the lounge entrance, a familiar face greeted them. Danielle Matthews, the new lead flight attendant, stood with a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Her presence was a symbol of change and hope, a product of the very reforms Jasmine had fought to implement. "Ms. Reed," Danielle said warmly, "welcome back. It's an honor to have you on board." Jasmine returned the smile. "Thank you, Danielle. It's good to be here." The atmosphere was different, lighter, more inclusive. Staff greeted passengers with sincerity rather than formality, and the subtle tension of the past was absent. As Jasmine walked down the jet bridge, she noticed small but meaningful signs of transformation posters promoting the Reed Protocol, quiet conversations about respect and equity, and a sense of shared responsibility among the crew. Her seat was ready, the boarding pass scanned without question. The flight attendant offered her a drink with the same courtesy extended to every passenger. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Jasmine settled into her seat, letting the hum of the engines and the familiar motion of the aircraft wash over her. She glanced around the cabin, seeing a diverse group of travelers engaged in quiet conversation, reading or simply relaxing. A young black woman read a book without the sideways glances Jasmine once knew too well. A couple from South Asia chatted softly with a flight attendant. An elderly man was helped with his luggage without fuss or hesitation. It was a vision of what could be a future shaped by resilience, courage, and the refusal to accept injustice. Jasmine's thoughts drifted back to the day of confrontation, the frustration, the doubt, the fierce determination. She thought of the community of supporters, the legal battles, and the relentless media storm. She smiled softly, knowing that the struggle had been worth it. Aaliyah leaned over, lowering her voice. "You changed the game." Jasmine looked at her sister, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We changed the game together." The flight lifted smoothly into the sky, and Jasmine gazed out the window at the endless horizon. The journey from that tense moment at the gate to this peaceful ascent was a testament to the power of standing firm and demanding respect. She thought of the countless others still fighting battles in airports' boardrooms and beyond. The path was not easy, but the progress was undeniable. Justice was no longer a distant hope, but a living reality embedded in policy practice and culture. As the plane soared, Jasmine felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The fight for equity and respect was ongoing, but she had helped set the course. The world was watching, and the skies were opening. Jasmine Reed's story is a reminder that behind every act of discrimination lies a human soul fighting for dignity and respect. It teaches us to see beyond the surface, to challenge the silent barriers that exclude and diminish. Her courage and calm resilience are a beacon for anyone who has ever felt invisible or unfairly judged. But it's also a call to action, a powerful wake-up for all of us to confront discrimination whenever and wherever it appears. Let us remember the strength it takes to stand firm in the face of injustice, and the impact that one voice can have in shifting an entire system. As you reflect on Jasmine's journey, ask yourself, how will you contribute to building a world where respect is the standard, not the exception, where no one is denied their rightful place simply because of who they are? If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join us as we bring more powerful stories that reveal truth, inspire change, and honor those who stand up for justice. Your support helps us keep these vital conversations alive. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for what's next.